Thank you very much for this kind introduction and also for this very difficult question. And indeed, I have actually just taken up the position of the EU Special Representative for Human Rights about a month ago. And part of my mandate, and I consider it a very important part of my mandate, is to be a strong voice of the EU on democracy, on human rights, on international humanitarian rule of law. And therefore, I was very happy to be invited to say a few words to you today on the occasion of the International Democracy Day conference, which will actually also be my first public speech in my new position. So thank you for that. And I do realize that some of you have been listening to people all day and probably also are longing to go out and have something to drink. So it will not be very long. I've been invited to hold closing remarks. But I think it's important. And therefore, I will stress that we know by the experience of centuries in some cases and in some countries, that if you want to have stability in countries, if you want to have sort of the least conflict-prone political arrangements, if you want human rights to be respected, if you want human dignity to prevail, that democracy is among the best systems to provide all of this. And I think we can also safely say that it applies to countries around the world, regardless of geography. But as was said rightly so by speakers before me, democracy can never be taken for granted. It is not that once it's there, it's just sort of a fact of nature and it will always be there. Representation, rights, rule of law, and participation empower citizens to participate in public affairs and make decisions about their own lives. It gives them agency. At the same time, the transparency and openness that are the cornerstones of our system risk becoming our vulnerability, unless we actively defend our democracies from external and internal threats. And especially in the current era that is characterized by very complex issues and challenges, it's becoming easier, as we see and experience every day, to surrender to populists, to radical movements, and to succumb to dangerous extremist ideas. Now, I have a background as a Minister of Defense in the Netherlands, as a Minister of the Interior. I've been a long-serving politician, but also a long-serving civil servant. And I've really dedicated much, if not all of my professional life, on, just that, really, defending democracy, working on security to protect what we value. And I think that in the current geopolitical situation, the context, the spiraling conflicts, the uncertainty and insecurity that we're living today, this background that I have hopefully comes in handy in the current position that I hold. And I hope that you will also be convinced by that by the end of this short speech. So first and most obviously, democracy and human rights is exactly what we need to defend. So why do we spend much on security and increasingly more? Because we need to defend democracies, because we need to defend human rights and the rule of law. And this is worth reminding ourselves of, especially now in times when even some within the European Union seem to be losing faith in democracy. Foreign powers, they interfere in our elections, in our democratic processes. We see it in different ways. It can be financial interference, political interference, cyber interference. We see that populist movements have gained support in several EU member states, sometimes with disregard for the rule of law, and that is worrying to me. And antagonists see the rise of nationalism with an illiberal, anti-democratic agenda, and they see it as an asset because it weakens our societies, our security, and it contributes to, let's say, a conducive environment for disruptive tactics, and in the end, aimed at undermining democracy. So that's a bit of a bleak picture. And I'll add more to that, unfortunately. The current trend of authoritarianism and disregard for individual rights constitutes a threat to peace and security in itself, because it erodes predictability, it erodes trust that we need in our societies. They are vital for democracy, and they're also vital for peaceful coexistence. Now, I would even go as far as to say that in a lawless world, where autocrats can suppress their peoples without consequence, in the long run, that is perhaps the biggest security threat that we are facing. And we only need to look at the news headlines every day. Thank you very much. To see that the eroding predictability in every field, in global trade, in communication, even in aviation between nations, is happening today. So respect for international humanitarian law, for human rights, they are fundamental building blocks. And we need it to enable citizens to trust their systems, their political leaders. And I want to give you 3 examples of this. Independence of academic and public institutions, such as the International IDA, or the Fundamental Rights Agency, or the independent media. We need this to ensure access to reliable information, facts to build policies on. That is information, so like I said, that has to reflect facts, and not the facts that happen to flatter the political leader of the moment, but facts that mirror reality, whether it's good or bad. And I said I've been a long-serving politician. I'm used to be under scrutiny of public and independent institutions. And I know that these checks and balances constitute the immune system that we need in our democratic societies. They are really our inner defenses against illiberalism and authoritarianism. And that's why an attack against an independent journalist is an attack on our democracy. And that's why the EU provides an emergency safety net for individual journalists through our support to the European Endowment for Democracy. Second example, the protection of minorities. Democracy is the rule of the majority, but trust can only exist if minorities safely participate in political life and know that their rights are safeguarded. So protecting the rights of minorities, whatever they may be, religious, ethnic, based on disability, sexual, gender, identity, they are always a key task for democratic governance. The inclusion of minority groups, of marginalized groups in democratic processes are essential for a healthy democracy. Third example, ensuring electoral integrity, in which individuals have the possibility to make their voice and their vote heard. In times when blatant attacks on our electoral processes, the EU's election observation missions, of which over 180 missions have been deployed in 67 countries since 2000, is our most recognized offer to support partner countries in holding genuine democratic elections. And electoral integrity also depends on the protection from political violence, from hate speech, both online and offline, I should say, because, neither algorithms nor big tech have human rights, but human beings, we have them, and they apply everywhere and all the time. And it's not a violation of the freedom of expression to protect individuals from incitement to violence or hate on social media, as little as it is to do so on the streets of Brussels. It's a prerequisite to ensure that everybody can participate, that everybody can vote, and that every voice matters. Now, we find ourselves in a new reality, and this new reality, it feels disorienting. It feels uncomfortable. And when we see that the democratic principles are under attack, even amongst our closest allies and inside our member states, that adds to this feeling. But I believe very strongly that our founding values of democracy, human rights, rule of law, they will serve as a compass. And that compass will help us to navigate in this context, which you could identify as being a democratic recession. But it will also allow us to look forward and to continue our work to defend democracy. And if there is something that gives reason to be hopeful, it is to see a room like this one, full of individuals and organizations that are committed to stand up for democracy and for human rights worldwide. And together, you have all been numerous. Together, you've been here to have your voice be heard. And I want to add my voice to yours. Thank you very much.